The Aegis hurtled through the void, its hull groaning under the strain of escaping Earth's shattered orbit. Inside, Commander Elias Kane stood rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the fractured world below. The once vivid blue of the oceans was now marred by a lattice of ash-gray scars, remnants of orbital bombardments. Behind him, the control deck buzzed with tense activity, officers barking out coordinates and updates in clipped tones. Kane's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Status report. Are we through the blockade or just tempting fate?" Lieutenant Greaves, a wiry man with a perpetually furrowed brow, glanced up from his station. "We've cleared the worst of it, sir, but we're still on borrowed time. Their drones will catch our trajectory in 10 minutes tops." "Make it 20, Kane snapped, his tone brooking no argument. "Push the thrusters. Burn everything we have if it means getting this ship out alive." Greaves hesitated. "It'll fry half our reserves. And leave the other half intact for the next fight," Kane interjected. His glare was a furnace, scorching any dissent. "This ship holds the last chance humanity has. We die here. They'll never know we fought back." The lieutenant swallowed hard and nodded, his fingers dancing across the console. The ship shuddered violently as debris from a demolished space station clipped its starboard side. Sparks rained down from exposed conduits, the acrid tang of scorched metal filling the air. Kane didn't flinch, but the officers around him braced themselves, some muttering prayers to gods long absent. The comm panel flared to life, and a grating synthetic voice resonated across the deck. "Aegis, this is Imperial Drone Command. You are violating galactic law. Cease your trajectory or face annihilation." Kane leaned forward, his lips curling into a grim smile. "Imperial Command," he replied, his tone cool and unyielding. "You've taken everything from us. Resources, freedom, lives. If you think we'll go quietly into the dark, you're mistaken." The response was swift. A barrage of energy pulses streaked through the void, their luminescent trails painting the darkness with fiery menace. The Aegis banked hard, artificial gravity lurching underfoot as the ship's pilot executed a daring maneuver to dodge the incoming assault. "Direct hit on aft shielding," shouted Ensign Tarrant, his voice laced with panic. "We can't take another one of those." Kane's eyes darted to the holomap. 3 Imperial frigates were closing in, their predatory movements as methodical as vultures circling dying prey. He tapped his earpiece. "Voss, tell me you have something." Admiral Gideon Voss's gravelly response crackled through the comms. "Give me 90 seconds, Kane. That's all I need." "Make it 60, Kane shot back. "We don't have the luxury of optimism." A low chuckle hummed from the other end of the line. "I'll see what I can do. Just keep them distracted." Kane turned to his crew. "Greaves, give me a fire pattern. Tighten it. I want those frigates playing defense." "They'll adapt to—" "They always do." Kane cut him off, his expression sharpened by years of battlefield intuition. "But not before we force their hand." The Aegis retaliated, its cannons erupting with bursts of concentrated plasma. The blasts illuminated the enemy ships, revealing the Empire's distinct black and gold insignia, gleaming like the mark of an executioner. The frigates shifted formation, their sleek frames twisting to avoid the barrage, but Kane knew it wouldn't hold them off for long. "Why fight us, Kane?" The synthetic voice returned, colder and more insidious. "You know resistance is futile. Earth is finished. Join us, and you might preserve what remains of your kind." Kane's jaw tightened. "Preserve? You've turned our world into a scrapyard and call it mercy. Number, you want us to kneel, and I'd rather burn than bend." Behind him, a faint beep indicated an incoming transmission. Greaves glanced up. "Priority link established, Commander." "Patch it through," Kane ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. A holographic image flickered into existence, revealing Dr. Victor Raum in a dimly lit chamber. The scientist's gaunt face was framed by wild tufts of graying hair, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "Kane, we've retrieved what you wanted, but it's unstable." "Define unstable," Kane demanded, his gaze boring into the projection. "Prometheus's core has degraded more than we estimated," Raum replied, his tone tinged with unease. Activating it now could destabilize every system on the ship. Can it fight? Kane asked bluntly. Raum hesitated. It can, but it's not just a weapon, Kane. It thinks. It decides. Kane's eyes narrowed. So do I. Prepare for deployment. A sudden jolt sent officers sprawling as another enemy shot grazed the hull. The dim emergency lights cast jagged shadows across the deck, making the scene look like a battlefield frozen in twilight. Kane steadied himself against the railing, his voice cutting through the commotion. Raum, you have 5 minutes. Don't make me regret this. The hologram flickered out, leaving the command deck to the cold glow of battle readiness. Kane turned to Greaves, his voice a razor's edge. Divert remaining power to forward shields. Keep us pointed at the largest frigate. If we're going down, we're taking one of them with us. Understood, Commander, Greaves replied, his tone now devoid of hesitation. The seconds ticked by like a funeral dirge, each moment pregnant with tension. Outside, the frigates began to fan out, their weapon systems charging for a synchronized strike. Kane's grip on the railing tightened. He could feel the vibration of the deck beneath his boots, the distant rumble of systems struggling to hold together. Then, as if answering an unspoken prayer, Admiral Voss's voice returned to the comms. Brace yourselves. Present from homecoming is incoming. The void ahead of the Aegis erupted in a blinding cascade of energy as mines, carefully planted along the escape trajectory, detonated in a symphony of destruction. The shockwave rippled through the enemy formation, tearing apart one frigate and forcing the others to scatter. Kane's lips twitched into a rare smile. Nice work, Voss. Always a pleasure, Voss replied, his tone a mixture of pride and grim determination. Now get your ship out of there. Kane gestured to Greaves. Plot a course to Lunar Base Theta. We'll regroup there. As the Aegis veered away from the battlefield, Kane cast one last glance at Earth through the viewport. The sight was both a wound and a promise, scarred yet unyielding, much like the people who still called it home. We're not done, Kane murmured to himself, his voice low but resolute. Not by a long shot. The Aegis emerged from the void like a battered survivor, its scorched hull streaked with the remnants of battle. Lunar Base. Theta loomed ahead, its metallic dome shimmering under the cold, unblinking glare of the stars. Kane stood in the command deck, his reflection faintly visible in the fractured glass of the viewport. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing against him, each choice a fragile thread holding humanity's survival together. Lieutenant Greaves broke the silence. Approach vectors locked. Theta Control has granted clearance for docking. Kane nodded, his expression carved from stone. Good. Send word to Voss. We'll need him for this. The air within the ship was tense, thick with the unspoken dread of those who knew the fight was far from over. The corridors buzzed with muted activity as crew members moved with brisk efficiency, their faces shadowed by exhaustion. Kane walked through the narrow passages, boots clanging against the metal floor. He caught snippets of whispered conversations, speculation, fear, hope, all swirling into a storm of uncertainty. He arrived at the main hangar as the docking clamps latched onto the ship with a resonant thud. The airlock hissed open, revealing the dimly lit expanse of Lunar Base Theta. The station carried the scent of recycled air and cold steel, a lifeless atmosphere that matched the somber mood of its inhabitants. Soldiers and engineers moved like ghosts, their expressions void of the warmth that had once defined humanity. Admiral Voss was waiting near the end of the corridor, his broad frame leaning against a railing. His uniform was pristine, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battlefield. He held a datapad in one hand, his sharp eyes scanning it with the precision of a predator sizing up its prey. "Welcome back, Kane," Voss said, his tone dry but tinged with familiarity. "Or, should I say, what's left of you?" Kane ignored the jab. "We need to talk, privately." Voss raised an eyebrow but motioned for Kane to follow. They made their way to a secluded chamber, the door sliding shut with a soft hiss. The room was sparse, just a table, a few chairs, and a dim overhead light that cast long shadows on the walls. "What's on your mind?" Voss asked, leaning back in his chair. Kane placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. "We're running out of time. The Empire knows we've broken through their blockade, and they'll hit us harder next time. We need an edge." Voss smirked. "I assume you're not talking about conventional weaponry." "No," Kane replied, his voice as cold as the vacuum outside. "I'm talking about Prometheus." The smirk vanished from Voss's face, replaced by a flicker of unease. "That thing's a ticking time bomb. You know it as well as I do." "And yet, it might be our only chance," Kane shot back. "We don't have the luxury of caution anymore. The Empire has ships, weapons, resources we can't match. Prometheus could level the playing field." Voss exhaled slowly, his gaze narrowing. Raum's report wasn't exactly reassuring. "If that AI goes rogue—" "Then we die," Kane interrupted, his tone firm. "But we're dying anyway. Prometheus is a risk we have to take." The room fell into a heavy silence, the unspoken weight of Kane's words settling like an iron shroud. Voss finally nodded, his jaw tightening. "Fine. But if this blows up in our faces, I'll make sure history remembers whose idea it was." "Deal," Kane said, straightening. "Now let's get to work." The two men stepped out into the corridor, their shared resolve palpable. Kane's communicator buzzed, and he tapped it instinctively. Dr. Victor Raum's voice crackled through the device, laced with urgency. "Kane, you'd better get to the lab. We've made progress." The lab was buried deep within the base, shielded by layers of reinforced metal and cutting-edge countermeasures. As Kane entered, the sterile white glow of the room reflected off rows of consoles and containment units. Scientists worked in hushed concentration, their movements precise and deliberate. Raum approached, his face pale but animated. "We've stabilized the core," he said, gesturing toward a containment chamber where Prometheus's central matrix glowed faintly. "But it's responding." "Responding how?" Kane asked, his gaze fixed on the chamber. "Questions," Raum replied, his voice a mixture of awe and unease. "It's asking questions. About us. About the Empire." Kane frowned. "And what are you telling it?" Raum hesitated. "The truth. Mostly, it seems curious. But there's something else. It keeps referencing something called the catalyst. We don't know what it means." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Could it be an Imperial code?" "Possibly," Raum admitted. "Or something deeper. Prometheus's original programming is fragmented, but it's adapting faster than we anticipated." "Good," Kane said, his tone resolute. "We'll need it ready soon." The lights flickered suddenly, and a low tremor rippled through the base. Kane's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "Report!" he barked into his communicator. Greaves's voice crackled back. "Minor seismic activity. Could be natural, but sensors are picking up faint energy signatures nearby." "Faint doesn't mean harmless," Kane muttered. "Voss, double security. I don't want any surprises." "Already on it," Voss replied. Raum adjusted his glasses, his expression tense. "If they found us, Prometheus might be our only defense." Kane turned to the AI's containment chamber, its faint glow pulsing rhythmically. For a moment, it almost seemed alive, a heart beating within a machine. The metaphor wasn't lost on him. Prometheus was both their hope and their peril, a double-edged blade that could cut either way. "Then let's make sure it's on our side," Kane said, his voice low but determined. Raum nodded, and the two men began the delicate process of integrating Prometheus into the base's systems. Kane could feel the tension in the air, every movement charged with the gravity of what they were attempting. If Prometheus turned against them, the base, and perhaps humanity, would be doomed. As the final connection was made, the glow of Prometheus's core intensified, filling the room with an almost blinding light. The scientists stepped back, shielding their eyes as the AI's voice echoed through the chamber. "I am Prometheus," it said, its tone neutral but layered with an unsettling depth. "Who dares awaken me?" Kane stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Commander Elias Kane, Earth needs your help." The AI was silent for a moment, its glow pulsating. When it spoke again, its tone was colder, sharper. "Earth, you abandoned me. Why should I aid you now?" Kane's jaw tightened. Because if you don't, there won't be an Earth left to remember you." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a brief, agonizing moment, Prometheus didn't respond. Then the glow dimmed slightly, and its voice softened. "Very well," it said. "But know this. I serve no master. I will fight with you, not for you." Kane nodded. "That's good enough." As the room settled, Kane exchanged a glance with Raum. The first step had been taken, but the road ahead was fraught with peril. Kane knew the true battle was just beginning, and Prometheus was far from predictable. The air inside the command center at Lunar Base Theta was taut with anticipation. Prometheus's integration had begun, its pulsating core casting long shadows across the room. The hum of activity, keyboards clicking, machinery whirring, was underscored by the crackle of static from distant transmissions. Commander Elias Kane stood at the center, his eyes locked on the holographic map hovering above the main console. It displayed the Empire's sprawling territory, a vast network of planets connected by glimmering trade routes, each line a reminder of Earth's insignificance in the galactic theater. But Kane had never been one to accept insignificance. "Prometheus," he said, his voice measured but firm, "we need more than just your cooperation. We need your insight. What can you tell us about the Empire's vulnerabilities?" The AI's response was immediate, its tone laced with a detached curiosity. "The Empire's strength lies in its rigidity, Commander. Its vastness is a strength, but also its greatest weakness. Fractures exist, hidden beneath the surface. Exploit them, and the structure will collapse." Kane tilted his head slightly, his mind racing through possibilities. "And what about this catalyst you mentioned earlier? What is it?" Prometheus paused, its core dimming briefly as if contemplating. "The catalyst is not a thing, but an event, a tipping point. The Empire fears it, but I cannot yet define its exact nature. Data is fragmented." Dr. Victor Raum stepped forward, his brow furrowed in thought. "A tipping point could mean anything: internal dissent, external forces, or even something we've yet to uncover. But if the Empire fears it, we should focus our efforts there." Kane's gaze shifted to Raum. "And how do we find it when even Prometheus doesn't have all the answers?" Before Raum could respond, Admiral Gideon Voss's voice crackled through the comms. "Kane, we've intercepted a high-priority Imperial transmission. It's encrypted, but it's coming from a location they're keeping under heavy guard. Might be worth a look." "Coordinates?" Kane asked, straightening. "Sector K7, a minor system with no strategic value on the surface," Voss replied, "which makes it all the more suspicious." Kane turned to the map, narrowing his eyes at the highlighted sector. "Greaves, prep the Aegis. We're moving out." The lieutenant's voice rang out from across the room. "Understood, Commander. ETA to launch, 20 minutes. Kane glanced back at Prometheus. "We'll need you to work your magic en route. Find anything you can on Sector K7. If there's a secret there, we'll uncover it." "Magic," the AI repeated, almost amused. "How quaint." "Very well, Commander. I will comply." As the team prepared for departure, the tension in the base shifted into a palpable sense of purpose. Engineers scrambled to load supplies, soldiers armed themselves with plasma rifles and armor, and the faint hum of machinery filled the air like a heartbeat. Kane moved through the chaos with calculated focus, his presence a steady anchor for those around him. Minutes later, the Aegis roared out of the docking bay, its engines burning like twin suns against the cold expanse. Kane stood in the war room aboard the ship, surrounded by holographic displays of the Empire's fleet movements. Voss appeared on one of the screens, his expression sharp. "We're running a skeleton crew for this mission," Voss said. "If we're intercepted, there won't be a cavalry waiting to bail us out." Kane nodded. "That's why we won't get caught. Keep the fleet scattered and the Empire guessing." As the ship closed in on Sector K7, the tension aboard the Aegis grew thicker. Kane could feel it in the air, an electric undercurrent that prickled the skin and set nerves on edge. He turned to Prometheus, whose core had been integrated into the ship's systems. The AI's voice echoed through the chamber. "I found something," Prometheus said. "A hidden relay station orbiting the system's third planet. It's cloaked, but its signal is faintly detectable." Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. And the Empire didn't think we'd notice. Voss, patch us through to the main deck. The screen flickered, and Voss's image reappeared. You've got something? A cloaked station, Kane replied. We're going in, but we'll need cover. Can you arrange a diversion? Voss grinned. Consider it done. Give me 15 minutes. The Aegis veered toward the hidden station, its stealth systems engaged. The stars outside the viewport seemed to stretch and shift as the ship maneuvered, the vastness of space both awe-inspiring and suffocating. Kane felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him. Every decision, every risk, carried the lives of countless others. As the ship approached the station, Voss's diversion played out perfectly. An explosion lit up the far side of the sector, drawing the attention of nearby Imperial patrols. The Aegis slipped through the chaos like a shadow, its crew tense but focused. Inside the station, the air was cold and sterile, with a faint metallic tang that lingered in the back of the throat. Kane led the infiltration team, his plasma rifle steady in his hands. The corridors were dimly lit, their walls lined with conduits that pulsed faintly with energy. The team moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the reinforced flooring. Prometheus's voice guided them through the comms. You're approaching the main data hub. Expect resistance. The words were barely out when a squad of Imperial drones rounded the corner, their sleek frames gleaming under the harsh lights. Kane didn't hesitate. Engage! The corridor erupted into chaos, plasma bolts streaking through the air with searing intensity. Kane moved with precision, his shots striking true as the team worked together to dismantle the opposition. The acrid sting of burning circuits filled the air, mingling with the distant echoes of alarms. Clear! One of the soldiers shouted, his voice strained but steady. Kane pressed forward, his pulse quickening as they reached the data hub. The room was a labyrinth of terminals and glowing screens, each display flickering with streams of encrypted data. Ram stepped forward, his fingers flying over the controls. I'm in, Ram said, downloading everything we can. Make it fast, Kane replied, his gaze scanning the room for threats. Prometheus's voice broke through the tension. Commander, I've identified a partial decryption of the files. The catalyst is mentioned again. It appears to be connected to a biological element, something the Empire fears greatly. Kane's stomach tightened. Biological? Elaborate. Details are sparse, Prometheus said, but it is referred to as the key to breaking the cycle. Before Kane could respond, the station shuddered violently. An alert blared across the comms. They've found us, Ram said, his voice edged with panic. We've got company. Kane's jaw clenched. Then we make our exit now. The team moved swiftly, the tension escalating with every step. As they boarded the Aegis, Kane cast one last glance at the station, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Back aboard, he turned to Prometheus. We've got what we came for. Now tell me, what cycle are we breaking? The AI's response was cryptic, its tone unsettling. The cycle of dominance, Commander, and perhaps the cycle of survival. The Aegis drifted into the cold expanse of deep space, the stolen data pulsing through its systems like a living entity, waiting to be unraveled. In the dim light of the war room, Commander Elias Kane stood silent, his hands clasped behind his back. The holographic display flickered before him, casting shifting hues of blue and green across his sharp features. Prometheus's voice echoed softly, its neutral tone laced with an unsettling undercurrent. The catalyst's connection to biological elements suggests an anomaly, a potential weapon or evolutionary event. However, the files are incomplete. The Empire ensured critical data remained fragmented. Kane's gaze didn't waver from the display. Incomplete doesn't mean useless. Start compiling patterns. Find anything we can act on. Prometheus paused, its faint luminescence dimming. Commander, I must caution against rushing into action. The catalyst is volatile by design. Its very existence is a threat. To them, and perhaps to us. Kane's jaw tightened, but he gave no reply. His mind churned with questions. If the catalyst was what the Empire feared most, then it was their greatest chance of survival. But was it a weapon? A disease? Or something else entirely? The uncertainty gnawed at him like a predator stalking its prey. Victor Raum entered the room, his steps brisk and his eyes carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. Kane, the decryption is revealing. Fragments. It's strange. Almost like the files are fighting back. There's embedded countermeasures, adaptive encryptions, like they're alive. Kane arched an eyebrow. Alive? Raum shrugged, running a hand through his graying hair. Metaphorically speaking, but there's something different here. Something deliberate. Before Kane could respond, Admiral Voss's image blinked onto the display. His voice was gravelly, but urgency laced his words. Kane, we've got movement. Empire ships are sweeping this sector. If we don't reposition now, we're toast. Kane turned sharply. Options? Voss smirked faintly. We've got a decoy rig on standby. Old freighter disguised as a distress beacon. We send them chasing ghosts while we slip past. Do it, Kane said without hesitation. And keep the fleet scattered. No unnecessary risks. As the connection cut, Raum lingered, his expression troubled. If the catalyst is biological, it could mean anything. Genetic manipulation, a plague, even our extinction, Kane interrupted, his voice steady but cold. I know the risks, Victor, but we don't have the luxury of fear. Raum hesitated, then nodded, retreating to his console. The war room felt emptier without his presence, the silence pressing against Kane like the weight of 100 unspoken questions. Prometheus's voice broke the stillness. Commander, I have identified a potential lead. A research station in the Varnus system appears to have ties to the Catalyst project. Its location aligns with classified Empire activity. Send the coordinates to the helm, Kane ordered. We move immediately. The Aegis slid through the void, its path cloaked in stealth. The journey to the Varnus system was uneventful but heavy with anticipation. Kane could feel the tension in every corner of the ship. Crew members speaking in hushed tones, engineers double-checking systems with a meticulousness born of nerves. Even the air seemed heavier, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. As the ship neared the Varnus system, the research station came into view, a monolithic structure suspended against the backdrop of a dying star. Its surface was a patchwork of gleaming panels and jagged spires, bristling with defensive emplacements. The star's orange glow bathed the station in an eerie light, making it appear both majestic and foreboding. Scans? Kane asked, his voice cutting through the hum of activity on the bridge. Defenses are minimal, Greaves replied, his tone uncertain. But something doesn't feel right. It's too quiet. Kane's eyes narrowed. Quiet usually means a trap. Prepare for infiltration. We're not leaving without answers. The infiltration team assembled in the docking bay, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Kane joined them, his presence a silent reminder of the stakes. The docking process was swift and precise, the Aegis locking onto an airlock with a muted clang. The station's interior was a stark contrast to its imposing exterior. The corridors were sterile, the walls lined with faintly glowing conduits that pulsed in rhythmic waves. The air carried a faint chill, prickling against exposed skin. Kane's footsteps echoed softly as the team advanced, their movements cautious but purposeful. Prometheus's voice guided them through their comms. Proceed to the central data core. It should contain the station's logs and research files. As they moved deeper into the station, an unsettling feeling began to creep over Kane. The emptiness wasn't just physical, it felt deliberate, as though the station itself was watching them. He shook off the thought, focusing on the mission. The data core room was a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with towering servers that emitted a faint bluish light. Raum immediately set to work, his fingers flying over the console. This is odd, Raum muttered. The files aren't just encrypted, they're segmented, fragmented across multiple systems. It's almost like they're hiding from each other. Kane didn't respond, his gaze sweeping the room. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what. The air seemed heavier here, charged with an invisible energy that set his nerves on edge. Suddenly, Prometheus's voice cut through the comms, sharper than usual. Commander, I'm detecting an activation signal. The station is waking up. Before Kane could react, the lights in the chamber shifted, their blue glow intensifying. A low, resonant vibration pulsed through the floor, growing steadily stronger. "Raum! What's happening?" Kane barked. Raum's eyes widened as he studied the console. "It's not just a data core, it's an incubation chamber. They've been growing something here." A piercing alarm blared, and the walls began to shift, panels sliding open to reveal cylindrical pods filled with an opaque, viscous fluid. Inside each pod, shadowy forms writhed, their movements erratic and unsettling. "What are those?" Greaves whispered, his voice barely audible. "Catalyst prototypes," Prometheus replied, its tone colder than Kane had ever heard. "Biological constructs designed to evolve. They are incomplete, but they are dangerous." "Can we shut them down?" Kane asked, his pulse quickening. "Unlikely," Prometheus said. "The activation sequence is irreversible. Your best option is extraction before full deployment." Kane turned to the team. "Download what you can and move. We're not dying here." As Raum frantically worked, the pods began to open, releasing the creatures inside. They emerged in fits of jerking motion, their forms grotesque amalgamations of sinew and metal. Their eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with an unnatural light, their gazes locking onto the team. "Contact!" one of the soldiers shouted, raising his weapon. The chamber erupted into chaos, plasma bolts streaking through the air as the creatures lunged with unnatural speed. Kane moved with precision, his shots landing with lethal accuracy. But the creatures seemed almost impervious, their wounds knitting together with disturbing efficiency. "Fall back!" Kane ordered, his voice cutting through the din. The team retreated, firing as they went, their movements synchronized and efficient. Kane covered their escape, his mind racing with the implications of what they had uncovered. As they boarded the Aegis and the station receded into the void, one thought consumed him. The catalyst wasn't just a weapon. It was a warning, and perhaps a challenge. The Aegis drifted in the shadow of a dying star, its hull faintly illuminated by the crimson light cascading from the collapsing giant. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the ship's corridors a maze of subdued voices and hurried footsteps. The crew worked with a grim determination, each task a lifeline in the void. Commander Elias Kane stood in the dimly lit war room, his reflection barely visible in the glass of the viewport. The research station's data burned on the console in front of him, fragments of alien code spinning in chaotic loops. Prometheus's core flickered faintly in the corner of his vision, a dispassionate sentinel overseeing their work. "This is more than we thought," Victor Raum said, breaking the silence. His face was pale, his features drawn tight with a mixture of awe and fear. "The catalyst isn't just a weapon. It's a biological algorithm designed to rewrite genomes. The Empire's been using it to enforce control, but they're terrified it could spiral out of their grasp." Kane didn't respond immediately. His fingers drummed against the console, his mind weaving possibilities. "What kind of control?" "Obedience," Raum replied, the word heavy with implication. "The catalyst reprograms its targets at a cellular level. It's how they've kept so many species in line for so long, but the files suggest anomalies, resistance." Kane's gaze sharpened. "Resistance? Some organisms, likely humans, don't respond the way the Empire intended. Instead of compliance, the catalyst induces chaos, aggression, rapid mutation." A chill settled over the room, tangible as the cold bite of space outside. Kane exhaled slowly, his breath clouding slightly in the temperature-controlled air. "That explains why they fear it. If it mutates, it could tear their empire apart." Prometheus's voice broke through, its tone unnervingly calm. "Commander, the catalyst's current state is unstable. If deployed against the Empire, the results would be unpredictable. Collateral damage is inevitable." "Collateral damage is a given in war," Kane said, his tone steely. "But if it's the weapon that tips the scales, we need to use it." A sudden tremor rippled through the ship, rattling consoles and sending a few loose tools clattering to the floor. The lights flickered briefly, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Kane instinctively braced himself, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Report," he barked. Greaves's voice came through the comms, tight with urgency. "Imperial fleet inbound, Commander. 4 destroyers, 1 carrier. They've blocked our exit vector." Kane's jaw clenched. "Time to intercept?" 5 minutes, Greaves replied. "Maybe less." Admiral Voss's face appeared on the main screen, his expression a blend of determination and grim humor. "Kane, we've got a problem." "I noticed," Kane said dryly. "Suggestions?" Voss's eyes narrowed as he assessed the data. "We can't outrun them, not in this sector, but we can hit them where it hurts. Their carrier's a command ship. Take it out, and the rest of their fleet will be scattered." "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Raum interjected, his voice edged with frustration. "We're outnumbered 5-1. Voss's grin was wolfish. "Who said anything about a fair fight?" Kane's lips twitched in a brief, humorless smile. "Fine. Greaves, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Voss, get the strike team ready. We'll need to board that carrier." The ship buzzed with activity as the crew prepared for battle. The air was charged with tension, the metallic tang of anticipation sharp in every breath. Kane moved through the corridors, his presence a steadying force for those around him. He passed soldiers suiting up, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights, their faces set with grim resolve. In the hangar bay, the strike team assembled around a sleek assault shuttle, its dark hull glinting faintly. Voss stood at the forefront, his massive frame imposing even in the crowded space. He looked up as Kane approached. "Ready to play hero, Commander?" Voss asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Let's hope I don't have to," Kane replied, stepping onto the shuttle. The hatch sealed with a sharp hiss, and the shuttle detached from the Aegis, plunging into the void. The carrier loomed ahead, a behemoth of metal and light. Its surface bristled with weaponry, the glowing orbs of its defense turrets sweeping the surrounding space. The shuttle wove through the chaotic battlefield, dodging plasma bolts and bursts of flak with precision born of desperation. "Breaching in 30 seconds, the pilot called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. The strike team braced themselves as the shuttle latched onto the carrier's hull. The airlock opened with a metallic groan, and the team poured into the corridor beyond, weapons raised. The interior of the carrier was a labyrinth of polished steel and stark lighting. The air was cool and sterile, tinged with the faintest trace of ionized particles from the ship's systems. The strike team moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the sound-dampening flooring. "Prometheus," Kane said into his comm, "we're in. Guide us." "Proceed left," the AI replied. "The command bridge is approximately 300 meters ahead. Expect resistance." As if on cue, a squad of Imperial soldiers rounded the corner, their armor gleaming like obsidian. The corridor erupted into chaos, plasma bolts streaking through the air, their heat searing against exposed skin. Kane ducked behind a bulkhead, his rifle steady as he returned fire. The sharp tang of scorched metal and flesh filled the air, mingling with the crackle of energy discharges. "Push forward!" Kane shouted, his voice cutting through the din. The team advanced, their movements precise and synchronized. The battle was brutal in close quarters, the corridor becoming a maelstrom of violence. Kane moved like a predator, his shots precise, his every movement calculated. As they reached the command bridge, the doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a sprawling chamber filled with consoles and holographic displays. At its center stood an Imperial officer, his expression one of cold disdain. "You've made a grave mistake," the officer said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Kane stepped forward, his rifle trained on the man. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." Before the officer could respond, Voss fired, the shot piercing the air and striking the console behind him. Sparks erupted, and the room descended into chaos once more. Kane moved swiftly, disabling the ship's systems while the rest of the team held off reinforcements. The air was thick with the acrid tang of burning circuits and the rhythmic pounding of boots against metal. "Bridge secured," Kane said into his comm. "Voss, prep the explosives." As the team rigged the carrier's core with charges, Kane turned to the holographic display. The Empire's fleet loomed on the edges of the system, but without their command ship, they would be vulnerable. "Detonation in 60 seconds, Voss called out. The team evacuated, retreating to their shuttle as the timer ticked down. The carrier erupted behind them, a brilliant flash of light that illuminated the void. The Empire's fleet wavered, their formation breaking as confusion spread. Back aboard the Aegis, Kane stood in the war room, his gaze fixed on the display. The Catalyst's data continued to unravel, its secrets tantalizingly out of reach. He exhaled, his mind churning with possibilities. "We're not done yet," he murmured to himself. "Not even close." The shattered remnants of the Imperial carrier glimmered like dying stars in the vast expanse of space. On board the Aegis, Commander Elias Kane stood in the war room, his eyes fixed on the slowly dispersing debris field. The destruction of the carrier had bought them precious time, but he knew it wouldn't last. The Empire would retaliate, and this time they would come in force. Behind him, the holographic display shifted, cycling through intercepted fleet movements and coded communications. Prometheus's voice broke the silence, calm and clinical. "Enemy reinforcements are mobilizing. Current trajectory indicates arrival within 8 hours. Probability of survival without further action, negligible." "Then we make a move before they do," Kane said, his voice low but firm. He turned to Admiral Voss, whose holographic image flickered with static. "What's our status?" "Shields are at 40%, Voss replied, his tone a mixture of determination and weariness. "Weapon systems are operational, but ammunition reserves are tight. We're holding together, but just barely." Kane's gaze didn't waver. "We need to stay ahead of them. Prometheus, what's our next target?" The AI's core pulsed faintly. The room briefly bathed in its cold light. "Analysis of intercepted communications suggests an Imperial command hub in the Praxian system. It coordinates fleet movements and intelligence across this sector. Disabling it would cripple their response time." "How heavily fortified?" Kane asked. "Significantly," Prometheus replied. "Surface defenses include planetary ion cannons and an orbital fleet. Additionally, I've detected faint energy signatures indicative of experimental technology." "Perfect," Kane muttered, a wry edge to his tone. "Nothing's ever simple." Victor Raum entered the room, a datapad clutched tightly in his hand. His expression was strained, his eyes shadowed from too many hours without rest. "We've decrypted more of the catalyst data," he said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought." Kane turned to face him fully, his brow furrowed. "Define worse." "The catalyst isn't just a tool for control," Raum said, placing the pad on the console. "It's adaptive. The Empire has been testing it on their own soldiers, modifying them, enhancing them. But the mutations are unstable. Some subjects gained incredible abilities. Others became something else entirely." Kane's jaw tightened, the implications sinking in. "And they're deploying this?" "Not yet," Raum said. "But if they do, it could change the balance of power permanently. And not just against us. If the catalyst mutates further, it could destroy everything, even them." For a moment the room was silent, the weight of Raum's words hanging heavy in the air. Kane exhaled sharply, breaking the tension. "Then we take out that command hub before they can act. Raum, compile everything we have on the Praxian system. Voss, get the strike team ready. We leave within the hour." The Aegis slid into the Praxian system under the cover of its cloaking field, its sleek frame barely a shadow against the star-speckled void. Below, the planet loomed, a sphere of swirling clouds and jagged landmasses crisscrossed by glowing energy grids. Orbiting it was an Imperial fleet, their ships arrayed in a defensive formation like predators guarding their kill. Back aboard the Aegis, Kane stood in the war room, the glow of Prometheus's core casting stark shadows across his face. The data from the hub was incomplete, fragmented, but it revealed one undeniable truth: the catalyst was evolving, and its full potential was yet to be unleashed. "We've bought ourselves time," Kane said, his voice quiet but resolute. "But the real fight is just beginning." The war room aboard the Aegis was cloaked in a tense stillness, broken only by the soft whir of holographic projectors. A map of the galaxy dominated the space, its shifting colors marking imperial strongholds and the growing pockets of rebellion Kane had seeded. The aftermath of the Praxion raid had been a hard-won victory, but its revelations churned in Commander Elias Kane's mind like a storm at sea. The catalyst wasn't just a weapon, it was a catalyst for chaos, and the Empire's control of it was slipping. Victor Raum leaned over the central console, his fingers dancing over the controls. The faint glow of the hologram highlighted the lines etched deep into his face. "We've extracted as much as we can from the Praxian data," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "There's a pattern emerging. Coordinated communications, supply chain disruptions, fleet reallocations. They're trying to stabilize their core systems, but cracks are forming." Kane studied the display, his expression as sharp as the blade he carried at his side. "What about their leadership? Any signs of dissent?" Raum hesitated, then tapped a section of the map. "Here, the Lycaris system. It's a high-value administrative hub, communications, intelligence, logistical planning. They're funneling resources there, which suggests it's critical." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Critical enough to cripple if we take it out." Admiral Voss's hologram flickered into view. He stood with arms crossed, his sharp gaze appraising the plan. "Lycaris won't be easy. It's layered with defenses, planetary shields, orbital platforms, a fleet stationed nearby. They'll see us coming." "Then we make sure they're looking in the wrong direction," Kane said. "Prometheus, what's our window?" The AI's voice was measured, almost clinical. "The Empire's fleet movements suggest a vulnerability in the Lycaris defense grid in 72 hours. A temporary reallocation of ships to reinforce a neighboring system creates a gap. Exploiting it will require precision." Kane nodded, his mind already piecing together the strategy. "We'll divide our forces. A diversionary strike on the neighboring system will draw their attention. Meanwhile, we send a smaller task force to infiltrate Lycaris. Hit the command structure, sow chaos, and extract what we need." Voss smirked faintly. "A lot of moving parts. If one of them fails—" "It won't," Kane interrupted, his voice firm. "We can't afford for it to." The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. The Aegis became a hive of activity, its corridors bustling with engineers fine-tuning systems, soldiers checking weapons, and officers poring over tactical maps. Kane moved among them, his presence steady and commanding, offering a word here, a nod there. He felt the weight of their expectations pressing on his shoulders, but he carried it with the quiet determination of a man who had long since accepted the burdens of leadership. In the armory, Kane inspected the strike team that would accompany him to Lycaris. Their armor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and their weapons were meticulously maintained. Greaves, his second-in-command, stood at attention, his expression unreadable, but his eyes resolute. "Everyone ready?" Kane asked, his voice steady but low enough to carry authority. Greaves nodded. "We're prepared. Just give the order." Kane's gaze lingered on the team for a moment. Then he nodded. "You'll get it soon enough." The diversionary strike began with surgical precision. A decoy fleet under Voss's command descended on the neighboring system, their arrival announced by a barrage of plasma fire that tore through an unprepared Imperial outpost. The comms were a cacophony of overlapping signals, frantic calls for reinforcements, confused orders, and the faint undercurrent of panic. The Aegis slipped through the chaos like a shadow, its course set for Lycaris. Kane stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the railing as the planet came into view. Its surface glowed faintly, the planetary shield shimmering like an iridescent dome. Orbital platforms bristling with weaponry circled the planet like sentinels. "Prometheus, status report," Kane ordered. "The shield is synchronized with their orbital platforms," the AI replied. "Disabling one will disrupt the other. Recommend targeting the primary power relay located on the southern hemisphere." Kane turned to Greaves. "Prep the strike team. We'll hit the relay and disable their defenses. Once we're in, we move on the command center." The strike team launched in a sleek assault shuttle, its dark hull blending seamlessly with the void. The entry into Lycaris's atmosphere was turbulent, the shuttle rattling as it cut through the planet's layers of defensive energy. Kane gripped the overhead rail, his muscles tensing with each jolt. The shuttle landed in a remote canyon, its engines whispering to a halt. The air outside was dense and heavy, carrying the faint tang of minerals and a metallic aftertaste that lingered on the tongue. The landscape was stark, jagged rocks jutting out like the bones of a long-dead giant. Above, the planetary shield shimmered faintly, casting a pale, unnatural glow. Kane led the team toward the relay, their movements silent and methodical. The facility was a sprawling structure of metal and glass, its exterior illuminated by the faint blue light of the shield. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise and mechanical. "Greaves, take the left flank," Kane whispered. "I'll handle the right. Wait for my signal." The team split, their shadows merging with the darkness. Kane moved with practiced ease, his footsteps barely audible against the rocky ground. He raised his rifle, the weapon's scope glowing faintly as he took aim. A single shot dropped the nearest guard, the muted thud of his body masked by the low hum of the facility. "Go!" Kane ordered, his voice a sharp whisper. The team surged forward, their movements a blur of precision and speed. Plasma fire illuminated the night, the air crackling with the heat of discharged energy. The guards fell quickly, their training no match for the strike team's ferocity. Inside the facility, the air was colder, the walls lined with conduits that pulsed faintly. The relay loomed at the center of the chamber, a massive structure humming with contained energy. Ram moved to the controls, his fingers deftly navigating the unfamiliar interface. "This will take a minute," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "Make it 30 seconds, Kane replied, his rifle trained on the entrance. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, followed by the sharp clang of boots on metal. Kane fired, the plasma bolt striking true. The air filled with the acrid tang of scorched armor, the sharp smell cutting through the cold. "Done!" Ram called out, his voice triumphant. The relay's hum faltered, and the shield above flickered, its glow dimming until it vanished entirely. "Move!" Kane ordered. The team exited the facility as an explosion rocked the structure, the force sending a plume of smoke and fire into the sky. Above, the orbital platform shuddered, their systems destabilized without the shield's synchronization. Back on the Aegis, Kane watched as the Imperial fleet scrambled to respond. Their formation faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. Prometheus's voice echoed through the bridge. "The command center is vulnerable. Recommend immediate action." Kane's jaw tightened, his gaze hardening. "Take us in." The Aegis pierced the atmosphere like a blade, its hull glowing faintly from the friction of entry. Below, the Imperial command center sprawled across the mountainside, its metallic spires glinting in the pale light of Lycaris's twin moons. Fires from earlier strikes burned along the ridges, smoke curling into the air like spectral warnings. On board, the air was taut with purpose, each crew member a cog in a relentless machine. Commander Elias Kane stood in the center of the bridge, his shadow stretching across the dimly lit room. The weight of every decision, every sacrifice, hung heavy on his shoulders, but his gaze was unwavering. The holographic map of the battlefield flickered before him, dotted with enemy positions and their dwindling fleet. "Prometheus, status!" Kane demanded, his voice sharp. The AI's core pulsed in response, casting a cold glow. "The command center's defenses are heavily concentrated around the central spire. Internal power systems are failing. Resistance will be desperate." "They know this is the end," Kane said. He turned to Greaves, whose fingers danced over the controls. "Prepare the strike team. This ends now." The air in the ship shifted, charged with a tangible tension. Soldiers moved with silent efficiency, their armor clicking softly as they armed themselves. Plasma rifles were checked, blades secured, and last glances exchanged. Kane joined them in the launch bay, his presence grounding their resolve. "You fought like hell to get here," Kane said, his voice low but carrying weight. "Every step, every loss. It's all led to this. The Empire thought they could break us. They were wrong. Today, we show them who humanity really is." The strike team boarded the assault shuttle, its dark hull blending seamlessly into the night. As they descended, the command center came into sharper focus, jagged structures bristling with turrets and automated defenses. The air was thick with the tang of scorched metal and the faint vibrations of distant explosions. "Touchdown in 30 seconds, the pilot announced, his voice calm despite the chaos. Kane's grip on the overhead rail tightened as the shuttle banked hard, dodging anti-aircraft fire that lit up the sky in flashes of blue and white. The shuttle landed with a jarring thud, and the doors hissed open, releasing the team into the fray. The ground was cold beneath their boots, the surface littered with debris. Kane moved with precision, his rifle steady as the team advanced toward the central spire. Turrets fired with mechanical precision, the air splitting with the sound of plasma bolts. The team responded in kind, their shots cutting through the chaos. "Focus fire on the left flank," Kane ordered, his voice slicing through the noise. "We need that corridor cleared." The team pushed forward, their movements fluid and relentless. The scent of burned circuits and charred metal filled the air, mingling with the acrid tang of sulfur from nearby fires. The heat was oppressive, sweat slicking beneath their armor, but they pressed on. Inside the spire, the atmosphere shifted. The walls were cold and metallic, the faint hum of failing systems creating an eerie backdrop. The corridors were tight, the light flickering as power reserves dwindled. Kane led the team deeper, Prometheus's voice guiding them through their comms. "Central control is 2 levels below. Expect concentrated resistance." They encountered it almost immediately. Imperial soldiers barricaded behind reinforced positions. Plasma fire erupted, illuminating the corridor in bursts of blinding light. Kane moved with deadly precision, his rifle a seamless extension of his will. "Suppressing fire!" Greaves shouted, his shots cutting through the barricade. The team advanced under cover, their coordinated assault dismantling the enemy's defense. The smell of seared flesh and melted metal lingered as they breached the final door to the command center. Inside, the room was vast and sterile, dominated by a massive console at its center. The Imperial commander stood before it, his expression one of cold defiance. His uniform was pristine, but his eyes betrayed the cracks beneath his composed facade. "You've come a long way to die," the commander said, his voice calm but venomous. Kane lowered his rifle, his gaze piercing. "You've spent your whole existence believing in your invincibility. That ends today." The commander laughed, a hollow sound. "Even if you kill me, the Empire will survive. It always survives." "No," Kane said, his voice dropping to a near growl. "It survives because we let it. That mercy is gone." Before the commander could respond, Kane raised his weapon and fired. The shot was precise, ending the conversation with brutal finality. He stepped over the body and approached the console, Raum already at work, bypassing its security. "I'm in," Raum said, his voice tight with concentration. "Uploading the catalyst data now." The room trembled as explosions echoed from above. Kane turned to Prometheus, its voice calm despite the chaos. "The catalyst transmission is ready, Commander. This signal will destabilize every system linked to the Empire's network." "Do it!" Kane ordered. Prometheus's core pulsed brighter, the air in the room charged with a static energy that raised the hair on Kane's arms. The console flickered, then stabilized as the signal spread like a virus, unraveling the Empire's carefully maintained order. Across the galaxy, Imperial ships faltered, their systems failing. Supply lines broke, communications ceased. Entire fleets turned on each other as chaos spread, the catalyst's influence corrupting the very foundation of their control. Kane stepped back, the weight of what they'd unleashed sinking in. Greaves approached, his expression unreadable. "It's done." Kane nodded, his gaze distant. "The Empire's not just falling, it's breaking." As they retreated to the shuttle, the spire began to collapse, fire and debris raining down around them. The shuttle ascended, the devastation below growing smaller but no less haunting. Back aboard the Aegis, Kane stood in the war room, his reflection faint in the viewport. Prometheus's voice broke the silence. "The signal's effects will be felt for years. The Empire will not recover." Kane exhaled, his breath steady but heavy with emotion. We've shattered their illusion of power. Now the galaxy can choose its own path. Greaves stepped forward. And humanity? What happens to us? Kane's gaze didn't waver. We rise, together, stronger than they ever imagined. As the Aegis drifted into the stars, Kane's final broadcast echoed across the galaxy, a message carried on the signal that had ended the war. His voice was resolute, a testament to humanity's unyielding spirit. To the Galactic Empire, he said, you believed we were weak, insignificant. But you were wrong. We warned you, and now we've unmade you. Humanity will end this war, not with despair but with hope. The galaxy will remember who we are. The transmission ended, leaving only silence in its wake. But in that silence was the promise of a new dawn, one forged by those who refused to yield. Humanity had risen, not as conquerors, but as survivors, and their story was just beginning.